Ladies and gentlemen, if you can, ladies and gentlemen, the pausa is over. We're ready for the next scene of the act. If you can take your seats, I would be ever so grateful. We're about to resume. Good. Thank you so much. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you once again Opera America's board chairman, at least through June 30, Freda Lindemann.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I think we heard a fabulous session just prior to this, and I'm inspired. I hope you are too. It's a lucky alignment of the stars that brings me to the final days of my chairmanship of Opera America, and Peter Gelb to Montreal, to be lauded for his 10 years as general manager of the Met Opera. Now I'm going off script. I'm going to tell a little bit of the history of the Metropolitan Opera because I'm part of the 20th century history, and luckily part of the 21st century history. So I've been there a long time, as most of you know. I was there through the 16 years of Joseph Volpi's tenure as general manager. And I was there when he told the executive committee he was retiring. We formed a small committee of 5 people. That's all. And I was lucky enough to be one of the 5. And we were to set about to do a search, a proper search, for a new general manager. I'm proud to say that that search was done totally in secret in a Park Avenue corporate office. The New York Times never found out, and they never reported about it, luckily. Anyway, we went through the search and we saw everybody and anybody who wanted to be seen or was eligible for such a big job. And we were at the end of the search, and we really were facing a dilemma. And I believe it was Beverly Sills. She was part of the 5. And she came to us and said, you know, I had a call from Peter Gelb, and he would like to be seen by the committee. And we said, of course. Now, Peter was known at the Met because he had done work, I believe, when he worked for Sony, he had done recording at the Met, and he knew the way we worked. He knew the hall, and Peter knew, and people knew him as well. So Peter came to see us on Park Avenue, and as everyone else did, he spoke to the little committee for 40 minutes, telling us about his life. And then he left the room so we could talk about it. And the 5 of us who were of another generation, an older generation, all of these 5, looked at one another and said, that's it. We found him. And it was universal, except we had to go back to Maestro Levine for his approval. Couldn't do anything without that. And Maestro Levine was thrilled with the choice, and we set about to negotiate a contract, and we were very happy. It was exactly what we had in mind when we started the search. It was a younger person. Peter was a bit younger then. And we were much older, and we wanted someone younger who could stay the course and stay with the company. We wanted someone who understood the way American companies work. That was important for us. But mainly we wanted someone who was hip. imagine all of us old folks thinking about getting someone hip. But the other word that was mentioned this morning, cool, could be interchanged. So we found someone hip, and we've been very happy. And I just want you all to know that the board of the Metropolitan Opera, the board, large as it is universally in support of our general manager. So please join me in welcoming the general manager of the Metropolitan Opera, Peter Gelb. Not too bad, huh? Come, you have to get this. One more thing, we have a plaque. It's not as large as my plaque.
Nor should it be.
The plaque says, "Bravo, Service Award in recognition of 10 years of dynamic leadership. Peter Gelb, the Metropolitan Opera," from Opera America, at the conference. Now you have to go home.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Freda, so much. And thank you, Mark, for inviting me to speak today, for your excellent leadership of this organization. And Opera America has been very fortunate, I think, to have had you, Freda, as its chairman. It was interesting hearing you talk about that interview. It seems just like yesterday that I was invited to have that interview. And I remember your very steely gaze at the time when you were sizing me up. And even though running the Met for the past decade has probably shortened my life expectancy by a decade or two, I still thank you for hiring me. One of Freda's colleagues on the Met board is fond of quoting an aphorism he attributes to Churchill, Winston Churchill, that the only endeavor more complicated than grand opera is war. Churchill actually never said that, and I've never been to war, but having led the Met for the past 10 seasons as its general manager, I can imagine what it feels like to be a battle-worn veteran, although I don't think I'm yet suffering from post-operatic stress syndrome. But in terms of aging and wear and tear, I think it would be fair for every year as head of the Met to be calculated in dog years, since dealing with the various forces and factions at the world's largest performing arts company is a formidable task. With its $300 million annual budget and 3,200 employees, the Met is a multi-headed organism that requires constant attention. For those of you who are statistically inclined, under my 10-season watch, the Met has presented 2,189 performances, not that I'm counting, well, someone counted for me, featuring 1,160 different principal singers, not all of whom had colds, 194 revivals, and 66 new productions, 17 of which were Met premieres. During that same 10-year period, we sold about 7.3 million tickets at the Metropolitan Opera House, another 21 million tickets in movie theaters, and had a cumulative radio and television audience of close to 100 million. It's no wonder that working at the Met sometimes feels like being inside of a very large fishbowl. And now we have some video to play for you today as well. So here is a highlight reel of this season's HD transmissions that were viewed by 2.5 million audience members on every continent, with the exception of Antarctica. If you could play that reel, please. I should, since Bernard is sitting in the front row, I have to thank him for being our partner and for having started that wonderful production of Elektra. Thanks so much, Bernard. But this RHD programs is the Met's approach to live cultural inclusiveness, since audiences around the world, from as far north as Tromsø, Norway, which is inside the Arctic Circle, to as far south as Uruguay and Argentina, and from as far west as Anchorage to as far east as Cairo and Jerusalem, are simultaneously sharing grand opera with each other when we have these Saturday matinee transmissions. The HD programs have also had a very positive impact on our casting, since opera stars like, not surprisingly, singing to a global audience. And the cameras have helped reinforce good acting on our stage, since singers know that even when they're not singing, they might be seen in a close-up reaction shot. This makes them stay in character throughout, which is a benefit to the audience in the opera house as well. Long gone are the days when the Met used to keep food stashes available in hidden corners of the stage for Luciano Pavarotti, who would like to snack between arias. Although the season that just ended was comparatively calm, it was momentous with the retirement of James Levine as music director after 40 years. The previous season had its fair share of other crises. And in times of crises, my clause, thanks to Freda in my contract, which says I have to be available 24/7, kicks in, since I always have to be on call. As I'm sure you're aware, 2 years ago, we negotiated new contracts with 15 of our 16 unions. I spent many months trying to convince our unions that the cost structure of the Met had to be reduced in order to create a more sustainable business model to help ensure our future. The unions, in turn, tried to convince the Met board and the public that the future shouldn't include me as its general manager. But the unions finally agreed to the first wage cut in the then 131-year history of the Met, and the season started on schedule. And between union and administrative pay cuts and other reductions that were mutually agreed upon, we're saving $90 million over 4 years. And we're all working together, once again, cooperatively. Then, as that same season began, ultra-conservative Jewish groups demonstrated outside of the Met, a few even threatening me with death in an attempt to stop us from producing The Death of Klinghoffer, John Adams' masterful opera about a terrorist hijacking in the 80s, which the demonstrators considered to be anti-Semitic and pro-terrorist. Undaunted, the opera went on and enjoyed a significant success. Seeing it, audiences realized that it was not anti-Semitic or the glorification of terrorism that it was accused of being. Although threatened, I was not assassinated, and thankfully for me, Jews can't be excommunicated. A few months later, an anti-Ukrainian separatist jumped on the Met stage to protest against Valery Gergiev and Anna Netrebko, who were performing in Tchaikovsky's Iolanta, while outside the opera house, other protesters held up a poster depicting me as a monkey on a leash held by Putin. In addition, that February was the coldest winter in New York since 1934, which certainly didn't help us at the box office and left us wondering where global warming was when you needed it. But as my early mentor, the late impresario Saul Hurok, once said, if the people don't want to come, you can't stop them. That is why my main preoccupation at the Met is to ensure that this aging art form stays afloat through new initiatives that will stimulate the public to keep attending and the donors to keep giving. For grand opera, the challenges of staying closely connected with the public are greater than for some other art forms, since, as we all know, operas are long and in foreign languages, with the core opera repertory coming mostly from the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries. With the basic repertoire largely set, although we are certainly attempting to make inroads with new works, as all of you are as well, it makes it even harder for an established older audience to accept change. Yet change, of course, is essential in order to achieve artistic renewal. Without change in the form of new productions and newer work, any performing art form would fossilize and ultimately not be able to attract new audiences. On the other hand, the music critics have become jaded by the repeating repertoire and seem to be rarely satisfied with either new productions or revivals of old productions. When I hire directors of all stripes from Broadway and the West End, as well as from Quebec, which has two luminary directors, in Francois Girard, who directed our majestic Parsifal, and the other luminary director from Quebec, Robert Lepage, who directed our controversial Ring Cycle, there is one core quality that these directors have in common. They are first and foremost excellent storytellers who are committed to presenting clear narratives to their audiences. They understand that there is an audience out there with whom they must connect in order to achieve needed popular success. The very first production of my tenure at the Met was the late Academy Award-winning filmmaker Anthony Minghella's stunning presentation of Madame Butterfly, which you saw a little bit of, and it was revived this season in that highlight reel, which at the beginning of my term, even most of the critics liked. But I still remember Anthony's incredulousness at his first press conference to announce that he would be directing Butterfly, his very first opera, and sadly, his last. One of the critics asked him, "What are you going to do to Butterfly?" Surprised, Anthony said, "What do you mean, what am I going to do to Butterfly?" "Nothing, I'm going to tell the story." And that's just what he did, touchingly and poetically. And that's what good directors do, in spite of goading from the critics. As Eugene O'Neill, the great American playwright, once said of his critics, "God bless every bone in their heads." The more familiar the storyline, like for example in Wagner's Ring Cycle, the more the critics seem to want to discourage a lucid stage direction. Dramatically moving the yardsticks forward in terms of new theatrical technology, Lepage's Ring Cycle at the Met attempted to bring clarity to the very complicated plot of conniving dwarves, guilt-ridden gods, jealous giants, and heroic humans. Here is a trailer to the film Wagner's Dream, which was made about the making of our ring. If you could play that, please.
Nothing defines an opera house more than new productions. Opera has to be constantly renewing itself.
The Metropolitan Opera kicks off its new season with the lavish production of Wagner's four-part Ring Cycle. It's the most ambitious production the Met has ever mounted.
This is as big as it gets for an opera company.
No new production is more significant.
The story of the ring is the creation and the destruction of the world. 16 hours of opera. This is an intense challenge for any director.
Robert Lepage, one of theater's great visionaries.
We use state-of-the-art tools to present a really fresh, new, avant-garde, crazy ring.
I went to Iceland, digging into the Icelandic roots, tectonic sets, breaking apart and separating suits, the Scandinavian myths.
I love Wagner. I'm afraid of what they're going to do with it, though.
Parts of it have always been unstageable, swimming underwater, walking over rainbow bridges, riding on winged horses.
Nobody has gotten it perfectly right.
That's what we're trying to do.
DEVEREUX, you'll be singing Brunhilde for the very first time.
There are only one or two or three Brunhildes who can command the stage at the Met.
There are so many challenging vocal passages. It can be defining in her career.
It was so daunting for such a time that I thought, are you out of your mind? It's a very emotional journey, this one.
Have you seen those sets?
I'm a little bit nervous about standing on it.
Emergency stop.
You were never in danger. Everything was locked.
I don't want to lose my feet or whatever.
This is when the real pros come out.
I'm so scared. I'm sorry.
Everything okay?
So far, so good.
I was compared to, being kind of a Christopher Columbus. You have to convince a whole crew that you're not going to fall off the edge of the earth, that you are going to discover something. You know it's there and you'll get there.
Is like.
We want more.
Thank you. The process of producing the new ring at the Met was one of the most challenging projects of my career, and it was not without its share of mishaps. But part of my job involves taking calculated and necessary creative risks. In the performing arts, hewing to the status quo might be the greatest risk of all, since the result can be artistic stagnation. The challenge of sustaining the aging art form of opera, to keep it young and vital, requires non-stop attention. The search committee of the Met's board of directors wasn't joking when they told me in my interview that one of my primary qualifications was that I lived only 4 blocks from Lincoln Center. After a 1-year interim term role as general manager-elect, I officially became the Met's 16th general manager on August 1, 2006. Several months earlier, I had held a press conference on the Met stage in which I announced my plans to reinvigorate the company. To reassure our core audience, I quoted Rudolf Bing, the legendary 9th general manager, who had said in his inaugural 1950 press conference, "I will attempt to run this house on the principle of quality only." But I also read this quote from him too. "What may be right now might have been quite wrong before, and what was right so far may be wrong in the future." I was beginning the balancing act of trying to connect the Met to a broader audience while trying not to threaten our loyal, older audience members too. The audience members who not only bought tickets but also provided the bulk of our contributions. Not unlike a political platform for change, I announced the Met's new strategic plans, which included a dramatic increase in the number of new productions each season from 3 to 7, now 6, with a new roster of the world's greatest theater directors at the helm, an even greater emphasis on securing more performances per season from the best singers and guest conductors, a strong commitment to producing and presenting contemporary work, including commissions, and expanding the Met's repertoire with previously neglected masterpieces, a new tie to the world of contemporary visual arts, a new initiative in media with global digital distribution of our live content to opera lovers. And finally, I announced an effort to tear down the Met's elitist image through a wide variety of public programs that would reopen our institution to the world. In order to get things moving, our very first opening night in September 2006 was transmitted live and free to an audience in Times Square, which was closed to traffic for the occasion. By presenting ourselves in Times Square, we dramatically demonstrated our plan to engage the public. Thousands of opera lovers and casual visitors experienced grand opera in the hub of New York, watching us simultaneously on numerous giant screens from Budweiser's to Nasdaq's. Here is some opening night coverage from 2012 with Anna Netrebko and Matthew Pallanzani in the starring roles of Elizir. If you could play that video, please.
Good evening, I'm DEVEREUX, and I'm thrilled to once again be your host for opening night at the Metropolitan Opera with Donizetti's Elizir d'Amore. While a glittering audience enjoys tonight's performance inside the Met, welcome to all of you out here on the plaza at Lincoln Center, and to everyone watching from Times Square, where tonight's performance is being seen on more screens than ever before. What does it mean for the cultural life of the city to make the Met's opening night so accessible?
I think it means that great art belongs everywhere in a great city, not only here for die-hard opera fans, but really in the heart of New York.
You both look kind of tired. Take a deep breath, it's okay.
You know, the stage is huge,
yes.
And we have to run and do lots of movements.
Yes.
So that's why there is a...
Dancing and laughing and, by the way, singing.
Yeah, that too.
Do I dare mention the aria coming up in the next act?
Which one?
Una furtiva lagrima, one of the most gorgeous and famous
we cut in this
pieces
production,
ever.
didn't know?
Thanks. From our very first season in 2006, we introduced family operas in English during the holidays. We launched our rush ticket program with expensive orchestra seats available for only $20, and now $25. We invited the public to free open dress rehearsals. We offered visual art exhibits, and we started around-the-clock Met Channel and Sirius satellite radio, among other brand-new audience-building initiatives. All of these projects were embraced by the public and continue today. In order to run the Met, I have to wear many hats: artistic and business leader, fundraiser, and sometimes amateur medical director for the opera stars. During the season, I often feel like a doctor who is always on call. In fact, after 10 seasons as general manager, dealing with the fragile state of tenors and sopranos, I've come to realize that there are only 3 stages of health for singers. They're always catching a cold, recovering from a cold, or suffering from a cold. Recently, one famous and talented tenor that I tried coaxing back from his dressing room onto the stage, and who had no fever and not even a case of sniffles, told me that he didn't think he could go on because he felt cold inside. As the old joke goes, how do you put a sparkle in a tenor's eyes? Shine a flashlight in his ear. No tenors here. Right? Long before I came to the Met, I thought that I was well trained in dealing with the challenging demands of artists with complicated personalities. In the 80s, I managed Vladimir Horowitz, who was perhaps the greatest pianist of all time, but who only agreed to return to Moscow to perform his historic 1985 concert during the Cold War after I had promised, with the assistance of the American and British ambassadors, to airlift into Moscow his nightly dinner of fresh Dover sole, the only food he would eat for dinner at the time, and guaranteed with the help of President Reagan that his Steinway would be kept under 24-hour guard by the U.S. Marine Corps. Long before spoiled pop superstars would be making their outlandish contractual demands, like specifying what color the M&Ms had to be in their dressing rooms, Horowitz had mastered the art of the outrageous contract rider. Amongst other requirements, Horowitz demanded that the temperature of the stage be exactly 72 degrees. If not, he had the right to immediately cancel. Along the way, I also picked up practical advice from Horowitz. Horowitz taught me the value of acoustics. He said, if the check is good, acoustics are good. He also taught me how to read a menu in an expensive restaurant, from right to left, like Hebrew, he said. Towards the end of his life, after I'd worked for him off and on for 12 years, he said to me, I've known you so long, you were like a member of our family. From now on, instead of calling me Mr. Horowitz, I would like you to call me Maestro. Dealing with temperamental artists like Horowitz helped prepare me for the monumental task of managing the world's largest opera company, a job that I think falls sometimes between being a lion tamer and a tightrope walker. Legend has it that Rudolph Bing, the illustrious former general manager of the Met I referred to earlier, would relax from the tension of dealing with opera stars by pretending to smack them on his desk with a fly swatter. My immediate predecessor as general manager, Joseph Volpe, was famous for threatening a difficult diva that her wig was going on the stage with or without her. Sometimes I fantasize about a utopian opera house where singers are always well behaved and show up on time for rehearsals. Of course, the uncertainties of our art form are part of what makes opera so exciting for its fans and for those of us who work at the Met as well. From my first day on the job, it has been my mission to honor the Met's past while nudging it forward. Of course, I realize that my work is far from complete. I know that change isn't always easy or comfortable, and we have no interest in implementing change just to be different. For example, although I would like to find replacements for the 2 remaining Franco Zeffirelli productions at the Met, La Bohème and Turandot, these lavish stage spectacles are still hard to top, and I'm not yet prepared to commit potential suicide with our audience by replacing them. I had a hard lesson in 2009 when we replaced Zeffirelli's beloved and grandiose production of Tosca with a new, grittier conception directed by the esteemed French director Luc Bondy, who up until his untimely death this fall had run the Odeon, the leading theater in Paris. Our new Tosca in 2009 certainly divided the public, although Bondi was convinced that the boos he heard on stage were actually audience members shouting woo. Since he said he had never been booed before, I didn't have the heart to disagree with him. We're now planning a new Tosca in 2017, directed by David McVicker, which will be Napoleonic in settings, but modern in its theatrical aesthetic. Even though we've seen our global audience grow, we have suffered some declines in recent seasons at our box office as the older audience transitions to a younger one. I know that it is the responsibility of the Met to win new audiences for opera, since no matter how venerable our now 133-year-old opera company is, there is no free pass into the remainder of the 21st century. We are studying new models for our performance schedule, thinking about creating more programs in which to bring opera into the community, planning to increase our educational efforts in New York and across the nation, and adding new digital platforms for our performance contents. We have increased the number of new ticket buyers to a record high this past season of 75,000 purchasers who had never previously attended the Met. They represent our future audience and future donor base as we continue to gradually lose our older subscribers through attrition. The problem of a declining subscription base is certainly not unique to the Met. Many opera companies in the United States are suffering from this problem, and we're taking many steps to deal with it, from new methods of ticketing to new audience initiatives, like our increasing in popularity Fridays Under 40 program. And thanks to our initiatives in social media, we have hundreds of thousands of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram followers. We've been consulting with outside box office experts like the Pricing Institute, who in recent years have taken a more scientific approach than Saul Hurok's aphorism that I quoted earlier. In the coming weeks, we will once again be conducting focus groups with all different potential audience segments, from those who attend regularly to those who don't attend at all. From the results of these studies, we will be developing revised loyalty programs and other techniques that will help us in serving new audiences and sustaining the audience we currently have, even if it means providing more free glasses of champagne to our adult ticket buyers and more complimentary brownies and hot chocolate to our younger audiences who will be attending our family magic flute this holiday season. According to an internal memo Rudolph Bing issued in November 1966, 2 months after the Met opened at its then new home in Lincoln Center, the Met's biggest problem was that there weren't enough tickets available, since everything was sold out on subscription. Until a time machine is invented capable of transporting us back to that golden box office era, we have to accept the new reality of scrambling for single ticket sales to make up for declining subscriptions. In order for the Met to thrive, we must also increase our efforts in education, since long gone are the days when Philip Glass found employment after graduating from Juilliard in the 60s as the composer in residence of the Pittsburgh public school system, a federally funded position, like others across the country, and also at a time when virtually every public school student in America was entitled to borrow a free musical instrument. Today, working more closely with the Met's Guild and hopefully with Opera America and PBS, we're going to be expanding our educational activities to reach more high school and grade school students in New York and across the nation. When students come to visit dress rehearsals at the Met, we're going to give them better seats down front, too, so that they can experience the magic of our stage in much closer proximity. We're also developing new business opportunities, including the growth of our subscription service, Met Opera On Demand, which now has 10,000 subscribers, an increase of 30% over last year, and which provides net revenues to the Met of over $1 million annually. After several years of development, we're launching a new computerized artistic program, initially at the Met, that we think may be able to follow in the footsteps of Tessitura and be available for license to other opera companies here and around the world. And we're now entertaining plans to expand our lobby to make it more hospitable to our current audiences and more appealing to new audiences. If realized, it will be a glass-enclosed space with a large terrace on top that will include a friendlier visitor center instead of the traditional enclosed box office, and it's where we would host educational events, situate a cafe, and provide large video portals relaying the daily stage actions to the visitors in the front of the house. As you can see, we're not sitting idly by. About 25 years ago, I made a documentary film about the cellist and political activist Mstislav Rostropovich's return from exile to Russia at the end of the Cold War. During one scene in the film, Rostropovich repeated the advice of his mentor, the composer Dmitri Shostakovich, who Stalin had oppressed and censored. Unbowed, Shostakovich had said, "We must be soldiers of music." And that's the credo to which I aspire as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bonjour. I'm Rob Marx, and even though we've gone over, but in a great cause and wonderful presentation, Mark Skorka just said that we can still take a few minutes for some questions. So let me just start by saying what a real privilege it has been to be in this great and creative city all week with our Canadian colleagues and the Opera America constituency. And it's an equal privilege now to be with the general manager of my hometown opera company. And you know, for a lot of people forget that the Met is an opera house built in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And a large chunk of the audience walks there or takes a short subway ride. And for all of us, believe me, our relationship to the Metropolitan Opera is exactly the same as the relationship that the audiences have with every opera company that's represented in this room today. It's the home team. And I was very struck by something that Freda Lindemann said twice, actually, in her opening comments for the conference, which is that the large companies in this constituency have a lot to absorb from the rest of the operatic landscape. So in this thought of global strategies and local action, since I think about the Met in part as my local opera company, how does this local but internationally very diverse constituency of opera organizations help to feed and sometimes inform a global company like the Met?
Well, you know, I think what's so important for any company, whether it's a company the size of the Met or a smaller company, it's the relationship the company has with the citizens of its hometown, its city. And certainly I am very keenly interested in seeing how companies relate to their local constituency. I think it's so important that with opera, in an effort to prevent opera from staying or being further shoved away from the cultural mainstream or staying within it, we need to find ways to bring opera together. And I think part of that has to do with joining forces with other cultural institutions and other cultural entities in a city. So, and I know a number of companies do that kind of work, and certainly it's something the Met tries to do as well. For example, this fall we're presenting the Met's first presentation of Kaya Sariaho's L'amour de loin, a piece I know you like.
Very much.
And you know, part of our effort to make sure that this event will be properly recognized is laying the groundwork far in advance by working with other institutions, the New York Philharmonic, which is going to be presenting her work around the same time as our opera in the Armory, which is one of the venues, of course, in New York. The Juilliard is presenting master classes with Kaya while she's there. The Chamber Music Society is doing something with her work. It's really, and so the idea being that we heighten awareness, we work together with museums, the Guggenheim, the French Institute also is inviting the original librettist of the opera, Amin Malouf, to give lectures. So what we need to do, I think, and I think a lot of you are doing it, is to really figure out ways, not every piece works that way, but to figure out ways in which you can really approach kind of holistically a presentation incorporating as many elements of the cultural life and cultural centers of the city.
And this is very typical of the kind of initiative that you've brought to the Met over the past 10 years. And do you feel that these approaches, these techniques have been refined over the 10 years? So that, let's say, will the experience with Kaya Sariaho in the fall be produced in some way, in a different way from what happened with the William Kentridge when the nose was done?
Well, I think it's really a question of each one has its own, provides its own blueprint based on the inherent work and who the characters are. In the case of William Kentridge, of course, we had great success with his first opera. Before he did Lulu, he did Shostakovich's The Nose, a piece that many people at the Met thought I was insane to have programmed. But we programmed it because of Kentridge, because his visual approach to staging opera was so extraordinary. And in that case, we were very fortunate to have a merged purpose in working together with the Museum of Modern Art, which also wanted to have, and we planned, as you all know, we planned years ahead of time. In the case of the Met, we're now locking down our 2021 season, which doesn't give us much maneuverability. But
may they all stay healthy.
And yeah, right. When they don't, we have to deal with that. As you saw, we're constantly adjusting on a moment's notice as well as planning 4 years ahead. But in the case of museums in New York, they plan interestingly, museums plan their exhibitions about on the same time frame as opera houses. So the Museum of Modern Art that planned its one-man show devoted to Kentridge's work was planning it 4 or 5 years ahead of the show. At the same time, we were planning the premiere of The Nose, so we worked together on that.
Let me ask you a question about the human aspects of producing, because in the American theater, one of the great problems is that a manager or an artistic director will be engaged as an agent of change, and you mentioned a number of times in your presentation that you were brought to the Met to create change. And something that we've seen in the theater frequently is that a director will come in as the agent of change, but change has not been defined in the same way by all the different parties involved. The artistic director will have one definition of change, the board will have another definition of change. So in coming to the Met under such circumstances, how do you bring the human qualities of this forward with you on your terms? And let's divide Gaul into 3 parts so that we have the audience and the company itself and the board in bringing everyone together to define change the same way.
Well, when you have an institution as large as the Met, I described the number of employees. There are 3,200 employees. We have a huge board, and we have a huge audience. And none of them necessarily think the same things or feel that they're all passionate about their work. The people who work at the Met are proud of what they deliver, and they believe in it, and they work very hard. And the board is made up of passionate opera lovers who want to support the art form that they love, and the audience is divided. There are audience members who think that anything that is other than Zeffirelli shouldn't be put on the stage. And then there are ones who adore, seeing a new Charot production of Elektra. So, the problem is trying to find, or the challenge is trying to find enough of a common denominator in each thing we do to appeal to enough segments of these large constituencies. So, it's I, as the general manager, though, I can only go so far. I mean, I don't direct the operas. I hire the directors. And they direct the operas. So but my job is to be kind of like a matchmaker, an artistic matchmaker. And I think it's much harder than in theater. Opera is so much harder, and I'm sure it's probably been discussed here and in other forums, to bring together, particularly in a house as large as the Met, the musical and theatrical qualities so that they actually feel in balance is an incredibly difficult feat, and it's amazing that it happens as often as it does, particularly when you're doing something new.
Is it more of a strategic process?
It's strategic, and it's artistic, and it's organic, and it's luck.
Luck is a major factor in
Luck
all
is
this.
always a major factor in everything.
I want to steal a question that Mark used with his session earlier this week about governance, where he asked if a crisis is essential to break down institutional traditions in opera. And is that necessary? Is the crisis mode essential to create fundamental change in what is almost by definition a tradition-bound art?
Well, I think it's essential that one of the problems I think that opera companies are suffering from today is a certain amount of benign neglect that went on 10, 20, 30 years ago, when it seemed like a number of opera companies were on autopilot. And so clearly, crisis makes it, I mean, it sounds funny, but crisis makes it easier. Because when you have a crisis, you have to act. But it's better, I mean, if we had anticipated 40 years ago that the fact that there would be no education in America of the arts for 4 decades, and what that what the devastating impact that would be, maybe somebody would have done something differently. But the answer is it's better to have vision, but crisis is definitely a driving engine.
Yes, I mean, the same approach would apply to the Metropolitan Opera House itself. It was built to that scale because at that time there were enough subscribers to fill it.
As I said earlier, I mean, the Rudolph Bing's biggest problem when the Met opened in '66 was that there were no single tickets.
That's right. I remember those days, and it was very, very hard to get in.
I'd like to see them come back.
Something that Caspar Holton said earlier this week was that it's essential that an opera company convince its audience to buy into the speculative nature of the whole experience, that there are no guarantees. And my response to him was that while that's absolutely correct, the willingness of an audience to engage in opera or any performance on a speculative basis, not knowing whether it's going to be really any good or not, is really affected by price. And opera obviously has to have a certain level of ticket price.
Right.
And is there a kind of sweet spot that has yet to be discovered at the Met between an earned income level that's viable for the Metropolitan Opera, but that's also economically affordable for its general audience?
Well, you know, we're always looking for that sweet spot, but the fact of the matter is nobody really knows. If you have something that is hot, that people want to experience, price is not an object. And that's what the beauty of dynamic pricing is that, you know, it was created by the airlines or hotels, and it's now being applied by opera companies. When we have a hot ticket, it doesn't matter what the price is. People find a way, and we have a wide variety of prices. When Anna Netrebko gave her recital, her first New York recital at the Met a couple months ago, we sold 114% of capacity because prices kept going up as demand surged. So on the other hand, as Saul Hurok said, you know, if the people don't want to come, you can't do anything. Right. There's no price. There's no low price. So I think, you know, I think saying I think it's maybe perhaps too. I have great respect for Caspar, of course, but I think it's maybe too great a leap of faith to expect an audience to buy anything that they're just sort of suspicious of or speculating about. I think that audiences need to be motivated. They need to want to buy tickets. And then the question is, and then when we get them in there, the biggest responsibility of an opera house is once you have the audience in your theater to wow them with a great experience so that they will want to come back. I mentioned that we have 75,000 new ticket buyers at the Met this season, which is amazing. But now our job is to convince them through what we put on the stage and how we follow up with them that they should return.
Well, it's the truth of any repertory theater, whether it's dance music or theater. It's an issue that goes far beyond opera. It's built upon the idea of a habitual audience, right?
Well, that's certainly the way it worked in the past. And the problem is that, but because that doesn't work anymore, because we can't rely upon a subscription audience to sustain the Met. And even if we were sold out, you know, given the economics, we have a $300 million budget. Our box office is around, you know, 90 some odd million dollars, or just under $90 million this year. We have another $19 million contribution to our bottom line from our HD transmissions, net contribution. So, and with other earned revenue sources, we still have to raise almost $150 million a year. If we were sold out, we'd have to still raise $120 million a year. So, you know, it's still hugely non-business-like. Yeah. Any way you look at it.
And I must say, with the most astonishing development staff in the city of New York.
Well, we have an incredible staff. They raise more money than any performing arts company in the world. And you know, the ammunition they have is people's love of the opera, and we're constantly getting new people in who are attracted to what we're doing. But you know, this is if the Met, and the biggest difficulty for opera companies is that when you, or any nonprofit performing arts companies, that when you have a workforce that sees that there is the possibility of donors magically stepping in and making up the difference between what you earn and what it costs, it's very hard for them to understand sometimes why the economics have to change.
Mm-hmm. We're really out of time now, so I want to ask you one quick question. What do you know now that you didn't know 10 years ago that's indispensable to the future health of the Metropolitan Opera?
Well, what I know now is that my job is impossible. And I don't know how indispensable that is to the future of the Met, but I do know that knowing how difficult it is, I also don't want to stop working as hard as I can with my very talented team to try everything we can possibly try to ensure that there is a future for the Met.
Great. On that note, thank you, Peter, very much.
Thanks, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
You're a great interview.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is just to let you know that all of our next sessions will begin 15 minutes later because we're just running 15 minutes late. So that will be 15 minutes later than what's printed in the program. But thank you so much, Peter Gelb, Rob Marx. Thank you very, very much.